month's installment of the BAE Systems Applied Intelligence Business Defense webinar series. My name is Rich DeFabridis. I'm your moderator for today's session, which is titled Not Unexpected, Preparing for Incident Response and the Business Defense Assessment, which will be presented by Angela Gunn of BAE Systems. Angela is an incident response consultant that specializes in pre-incident planning and training exercises, including incident response plan development and review, readiness evaluation, and tabletop exercises. Prior to joining BAE Systems, Angela worked for Hewlett-Packard and Microsoft, and she is also an award-winning journalist and editor and the author of 4 books. So she is eminently capable of delivering today's content, and I think you'll find it very enjoyable. Angela's going to discuss a sustainable and executable incident response plan, as well as how organizations can identify gaps in their current cybersecurity model and key elements of managed security services. Before I hand it off to Angela, I just want to cover a few housekeeping items. All attendees are in listen-only mode. All microphones are muted. That basically means you can hear us, but we can't hear you. Since we can't hear you, if you find that you have questions on the content, by all means, please type them in the questions area on the GoToWebinar control panel. You'll see that off to the right. And then once the presentation has concluded, there may be, time permitting, some brief Q&A. So again, as we aggregate the questions you ask in the panel, we'll pull those and we'll present them for question and answer. Any questions we don't get to live, we'll follow up via email within the coming days after the webinar. And last point, should you want to hear the webinar again, or perhaps you have a colleague who was unable to attend today's session, we will record the webinar and it'll be archived for playback, and the slide deck will be made available to you, and we'll send that out again at a later date after the session today. So without further delay, I will turn it over to Angela. Angela, it is all you.
Thank you, Rich. Good morning, everyone. My name is Angela Gunn, and I'm an incident response consultant for BAE Systems Applied Intelligence. Thanks for joining me on the call today. There we go. Yay, fun with slides. We're here to talk about incident response, or IR, as it's often called. My goal for the next hour is to set some terms, walk you through the 6 basic steps of the incident response process, talk about some of the components of a solid incident response plan, and then get into some of the allied best practices that make incident response a clearer and more effective process, including the business defense assessment from an IR point of view. I'll take about 30-35 minutes or so for this, and then I'll be taking questions. All right, I find it useful to define 3 terms up top, so let's spend a moment here on this slide. There are words that get thrown around a lot in security situations, and we have events, we have incidents, and we have breaches. I'm willing to bet you have used all 3 of these terms, and I am also willing to bet you have corrected or tried to correct someone in your org who has gotten them twisted. So, an event is something that happens. That's it. It is an observable action, whether executed by a human or by a machine. And it's a value-neutral term. Events are innocent until proven guilty, or at least they are value-neutral until they are interpreted or until a result is observed. At that point, they may be just events, or they may be adverse events with negative consequences. And an incident is an adverse event that violates an organization's security or privacy policies. We usually talk about an incident as something that violates the confidentiality, integrity, or availability of a system, including its data. So a user prints a document, that's an event. A user prints a bunch of cat photos from Facebook, okay, maybe an adverse event if she's using up the paper or blocking other work or violating internet use policy. You might want to word with her about proper use of printer and network resources. User prints a document she's not supposed to print and leaks it to the press. Yeah, there's your incident, definitely your incident. And then there are data breaches. Now, a breach is a form of an incident, but it's specifically one that involves harm or potential harm to data. Now, your lawyers care very deeply about whether any given incident involves a breach, because that's when you get into problems like customer notification, regulatory agencies, and so on. You know, cat photos from Facebook, not a breach. Documents leaked to the press, breach. So event, incident, breach. This is your life. Let's plug these into incident response and see what you get. The 6-step incident response process. Okay. There are 6 spokes in the great wheel of incident response. Yeah, I know, you thought it was a line from start to finish. I know you did. It's sure, for individual incidents, it is a line from start to finish. You start an incident and eventually you finish it. But as we walk through these, I want you to keep in mind the idea that you will do this over and over throughout your career. The process of responding to incidents builds your ability and effectiveness at responding to incidents. Learning from experience is key. It's so much so that it's built into the system. In a bit, you'll talk about preparedness and how to make the most of being, as we say, in a watch mode. We're going to talk about whom you need on the incident response team that's going to be with you through this process. And so we should also clarify what we won't be covering today, by the way. An incident response plan is not a disaster recovery plan. It is not a business continuity plan. It is not an emergency management plan. It dovetails with all of these. And when we build IR plans with clients, we talk about how to interface with those other kinds of plans. But those plans are different conversations. You know, definitely part of my circus, but not my monkeys, so to speak. So we have walked through that. Hold on. I'm sorry. I just realized the slide is wrong. That's okay. Everybody sit with me in the wrongness of this slide. We're going to assume for this walkthrough that you are the incident response team lead, and that's a very natural role for a senior IT or security person. And in this role, you want to be sure that you have the muscle to reach into any part of the company you need to activate to get this thing handled, and that includes the executive suite. I have some thoughts on that in a little bit. And by the way, I recommend that you have yourself cloned for this job, or if cloning isn't practical, you get a counterpart in-house who can just as easily assume leadership duties on IR events, incidents. You will, for the rest of your time working with this person, you'll be coordinating vacations, you'll be coordinating on-call schedules, you will definitely be in each other's pockets. So, you know, choose wisely. Okay. And now, here's the slide I wanted. You have an event. Your first step is to assess the nature and the scope of the event. So at this point, you're probably gathering information. You're probably talking to your IT team or to maybe a frontline support person. You may even be interviewing a particular employee. So right away, you're moving quickly to get a bead on this event and decide if it's truly an incident. I mean very quickly. This happens in minutes, not days. At this point, the IR response, the incident response lead and the investigators are beginning their work, and you need to proceed with caution despite moving quickly. You need to make a point of adhering to proper forensic investigation practices and documenting your process. If you find yourself talking to an end user or a frontline support person to figure out what happened, take good notes. If you have even the suspicion that your process might require forensic examination or could lead to a situation in which legal proceedings come to the fore and chain of custody, issues like that, bring your legal team in to advise you on your process as soon as possible. More on that in a second. So at the end of this first stage, this matter of minutes, you either decide it's just an event, keep watching, but don't spin up your full response process, or you pull the trigger and you declare that an incident is underway. So now it's time to summon your incident response team. And again, we'll get to who those people are in a second, but for now we're just going to stick with these, the 6 steps you do. So your next step and yes, our slides are in sync again. Your next step is to identify which systems and what customer or business information, if any, has been affected. You have enough information to know something's happening. So we're in stage 2. You remember breach, by the way, incident, event, breach? Yeah, breach gets interesting already. So your first knowledge resource at this point, in this stage 2, is your legal team, by the way. And though I am not a lawyer, I can promise you that your lawyer totally agrees with me. Okay, here's the deal. You're now in the second stage. You know this event is actually an incident, so more serious. So within the next hours, even the next minutes, you are about to learn a lot more about what's going on, and some things you think you may know may turn out to be wrong later. You may learn that what you have is a breach, but there's still some indecision here. Now, like I said, you need to use that breach designation very carefully because a breach is a legal issue. It means something really specific as far as law and liability and regulation, all sorts of fun. Before you make that call, start using that word breach, you want to have lawyers in the mix, and you want to keep these conversations you're having shielded by ACP, attorney-client privilege. Again, I am not a lawyer, and I am definitely not your lawyer. This is a bigger conversation you should have with your lawyer in the IR planning stages, but not when you're in the middle of this process. And right now, here you are. You're in identify. You're in process stage 2. You are continuing your technical investigation. Like I said, you're determining scope of the incident and which systems and data are affected. You have alerted your IR team. They have confirmed that they're ready to participate in this IR process, and you call a meeting, in person preferably. You get together, get in one room, and just lay out what you know and what's moving. Everyone gets acquainted with the situation pretty much at once that way, and pretty much within earshot of the others. It's a very important time, even if it feels like you shouldn't be leaving the server room to go sit in a meeting room with some folks. This team, they all have their parts to play, and again, we'll get more into that when we get to the team building part of our conversation. But they start playing these parts. Legal and the other regulatory folks start their thing. Public relations, which you may call comms or marketing, whatever your org does, they're in the room and they're working out what they're going to say if the matter goes public. And if people are already asking about it from the press or on social media, they're telling you that. So it's another information source that's feeding what you know about the global characteristics of your now incident. And someone in this room with you is taking just a ton of notes because you or someone you nominate on this team is about to write an executive briefing, which summarizes the incident and makes any preliminary requests for resources that might need to be made available from the folks upstairs. And as with meeting with your IR team, it may feel like time you don't have to handle your execs right in the middle of things, or maybe you don't feel you have enough information to go on. Here's the thing. One of the things I've noted over the years of doing this is that executive attention to an incident is really tough to curate. You get too much attention and you've got an executive in your ear every half hour and you're distracted from, solving the problem. You get too little attention and you don't get the resources you need, and you're kind of trying to fight the dragon with a small twig. I find that socializing your IR process to your executive team in advance of an actual incident can save you a lot of pain in the middle of the process, and I'll talk a little bit more about managing executive expectations and pain when we discuss who's on this team of yours. You can tell I find that's really important, but we got to get through these steps. Meanwhile, so the time frame in stage 2 is usually a matter of hours. You've already ascertained something is happening, and now you're getting your bead on the true parameters of the situation. So step 3 is where you begin to respond to the incident. And one of the guys on my team, he loves that Abraham Lincoln quote. He's always using this quote, give me 6 hours to chop down a tree and I will spend the first 4 sharpening the axe. I love that. And everything you've done to this point in assess and identify is bringing you to your tree with a nice sharp axe. Your response is going to depend on the incident, obviously, the details of your response. But as you're working through what to do, I encourage you to keep a list of priorities in mind, what you're working to protect. And in order, the things you're working to protect, first is human lives and safety. That's job one, always. In fact, I said already this isn't a disaster recovery talk, right? Okay, it's still not, but a good incident response plan includes explicit instructions on when to pause the process, and imminent harm to humans is absolutely top of that list. Priorities are important here. So that's first. Second, your second most important priority is sensitive or classified data. Knowing if you have that kind of data and where you keep it, it should be something you're just exquisitely aware of as you plan, not just response, but your network all up. Again, your legal team's going to have thoughts on that kind of material. Third, business critical or otherwise high value data. This is proprietary material, managerial material, executive sensitive material. All that goes in this third bucket. Fourth would be, hardware, software, non-critical data. And then fifth on the priority list is workflow, which you might be a little surprised that I've jammed this far down the list. Disruption is totally a pain point. I get it. Nobody's unclear on that. But in this situation, especially as you begin your response, you need to not let it blind you to the first 4 items on this list. So now you're chopping down your tree. You're keeping in touch with your IR team, with senior management. You may be reassigning IT staff to cover for incident responders until this situation is contained. This is, as they say, the work part of the work. And this stage may take hours or even days to feel as if you've really started to get a handle on this situation. So those meetings with your IR team, probably daily, and you are sending that executive summary upstairs to your execs daily. Keep them informed, but this is the point where you're shielding your people. Your people are busy right now. If an executive attempts to reach out directly to a team member or someone else for information at this stage, that request needs to come back to you. You are off, you're off making sure they can do their job. Let them be great and let the executive be calm over here. So where are we? You identified the existence of the problem, first step. You got your head around the problem, second step, identify. This step, respond, you started to act. Great. So, all right, it loaded. All right, you responded and it worked. You have, congratulations, you have a beachhead. You're fighting back. You're making actual progress. So step 4 is where you report. You and your team have this great feedback loop going, but you might have, maybe you've moved the conversation out of the meeting room and back to email. The team lead, yeah, that's still you, sorry, is keeping everyone briefed on how the incident's being brought to ground. Your team's coming back with information on how they're handling matters in their domains. Everything's ticking along. The tech investigation, okay, it's probably still ongoing, but remediations, appropriate remediations are being put in place. Legal is handling its breach-related tasks if those are there. They're making sure everything's documented, handled properly if there's regulatory stuff involved. If somehow word has reached the public about your situation, comms is handling it. They're telling you how they're handling it. Things are, what A-team, I love it when a plan comes together. This is where it starts to feel like things are in hand. And you keep those executive summaries coming out. That's always. So you are in the report stage. Going well, And at this point, you are, you're getting back to normal. This is the finish line. Yeah, I know, 6 steps, 5 is the finish line. Just, marinate in that truth for a second. So you're getting back to normal. You have resolved this incident on both the technical and non-technical fronts. You're bringing systems back online. You're figuring out, how far back you need to go to get your data backup situation in order. You're making sure that legal and HR and comms and all those teams on your team have what they need to wrap things up for their parts of the process. Nice work. Don't forget to send a final executive summary to let the brass know that everything is in hand, situation under control. Beyond the finish line, step 6, review. It's really important, for the good of your network, for the maximum return on all the money and the man hours you invested in handling this thing, and honestly, for your own sanity, to review what's happened. So during the incident, you will have had wins, you will have had losses, and you will have had surprises about how things really work at your organization. And it's important to capture that information and to learn from it. To quote Battlestar Galactica, which another one we quote a lot around here, all this has happened before and will happen again. So make the most of this time. The IR team, they come together to talk once more. You talk through the incident and determine further actions, including if changes to policy are needed or changes to the IR plan are needed. This is when we get that aired out. Give each team a chance to speak. And one more time, it's really good to keep specific notes on the tech aspects of the incident. There's not a lot of new stuff under the information security sun, and what you learn dealing with ransomware the first time you fight it is probably going to be really helpful in determining how you're going to fight it in the next round. So keeping a playbook with good notes at this stage, it will save you pain next time. And it will also, just from a corporate point of view, this playbook will remind you how hard you work if or when the incident is reviewed at the end of the year. And that's it. That's the process. Assess, identify, respond, report, resolve, review. All right, I gave you some general time frames, and I want to expand on that just for a bit. First stages of an incident, assess and identify, are relatively quick and relatively linear, and a lot of information is stacking up quickly. Some of it's wrong, some of it's confusing, but it's stacking up right here. And decisions are made and they're acted upon very quickly. The middle stages, respond and report, they may take days, they may take weeks, and some tasks will be repeating or they'll be looping back as the situation changes and clarifies. In these last 2 stages, you resolve and review. That's both closure for the incident itself and an opportunity to address areas for improvement revealed during the process. So, the schedule is flexible, but don't wait too long. This all fades and faster than you'd expect. And then you go back to watch mode. You prepare for the next thing. Circle of life. In other words, get ready for the next one. So we're about to talk about a few good ways of making good use of watch mode. We're going to talk about understanding the threat landscape, knowing where you may have information leaks, figuring out what you need to strengthen your hand, all that good stuff. But first, let's talk about what I consider the most crucial part of preparing for incident response, and that's preparing, having a plan, having an incident response plan on paper, written out, and most importantly, known and practiced by the people in your org who need to know it and understand it and live it and execute on it when what they really want to do is panic and hide under the desk or pretend it's not happening. So who are these people? I keep going on about them. Who are these people? Well, that's it's part of what you build into the plan. Incident response is a team effort, and you need an incident response team. And some of the people in your org, including you, are going to have this team membership as a core component of their work. And others you will keep on your reserve list to activate as necessary. So let's run through who these people are on your IR team. But before we go to that slide, because it's a very scary, frightening slide, I want to caution you that for some organizations, maybe smaller organizations, these are roles, not necessarily individuals. Okay, smaller orgs are a lot of times asking one person to tackle 2 or 3 jobs just in daily life. And, that's important to consider as you're building your team that adds this other role. It's a lot, and these situations can be intense, and anyone who's valuable enough to be part of your team, probably already has a lot on their plate, right? And so this is one of those situations where keeping a third-party IR team on retainer, like a team like mine, honestly, it's a good balance between the resources you've got at your disposal day to day and what you need to have in the tank, when incidents attack. So, very scary slide here. Oh, look at all that scariness. It's terrifying. All right, so IR team is composed of representatives of various constituencies. It is led by an incident response team lead, coordinator, or like we covered, 2 coordinators, cloned or otherwise. So you've got your core team here on your left, and those members include, the plan itself, which should be almost a living thing, so we'll put it at the top in all caps. How nice. So you've got IT operations security, and you may have multiple representatives, especially in tricky situations or where you want to make sure your IT guys, your network guys, and your forensics guys are talking to each other rather than shouting at each other. Very important. Representative senior management, and ideally, this person is able to quickly communicate, with or without the help of the daily executive summary, any need for additional resources. And I keep raising that issue of how to loop in your executives, not too much, not too little, but I raise it because it keeps coming up in real life. To get your executives squared away, you are going to have to tell them about your incident response planning genius before you ever have an incident go through it. Before anything is happening, you build the process and then socialize the process with these people. Tell them there is a process and that when something happens, they will be kept informed in writing in a very expectable, orderly fashion. And then when something's actually happening, tell them what's happening. Tell them that they will be updated at a certain time or times of day, and make sure you deliver. I do not recommend hitting your execs with the full tech discussion back and forth fire hose, but a 1-page write-up with brief incident description, status, and the steps you're taking to address it really does a lot to keep those guys where you need them to be. But if all this, that's managing up. But if that fails, this is your backup, your representative of senior management. If you have an exec who really wants to wade into the thick of things, the senior team member can go help manage the offer. So, and that person may, by the way, be bioidentical to one of the next 2 on this list, the CTO or the Chief Risk Officer. Those folks, if you have 3, great. If you have 2 of them, great. If you have 1 of them, buy that person a cup of coffee. Let's see, who else? Comms and marketing, they have their specialized skill set to bring to the room. Heads of affected departments, when that's applicable, you'll know incident by incident when you need that person in, but when you do, you really do. Legal, obviously, we've talked about how close you should be to your legal team. And then other subject matter experts as needed. This is a judgment call, and this is your judgment call as IR team leader, and you do this in consultation with the team who recommends to you what they think needs to be in the room. So those are your core team members, and then you may have people cycle in and out of this process depending on the incident. Service desk personnel, your company's cyber insurance liaison, your internal audit director, human resources, law enforcement. Yeah, by the way, you can totally bring in outside people if it's appropriate. By all means, certainly law enforcement. Usually legal will be the interface to those folks, but totally fine to have them at the table if legal believes the situation merits it. Physical security officer for those types of incidents. Third-party incident response or forensic analysis experts, like people like me, right? And your suppliers, third-party suppliers, ISPs, software vendors, crisis comms experts if you're really deep in the soup. So that's most of your list. Now, looks like a lot of people, like I said, big scary slide. But as individual incidents develop, some of these team members are going to be crucial, and some may be able to take a less active role. And the important thing is that everyone in the circle is aware of what's happening and aware of what their domain needs to know and to do. I mean, there's already enough surprise with incidents, by definition, right? And your goal is to avoid surprising, your lawyers, your shareholders, your executive team, those guys again. So not all the people on this list I'm giving you, on these lists, can solve technical problems, but they can solve the kinds of problems that result from technical problems. In fact, one of the processes of developing a truly mature functional IR plan is you're going to sit with each of these core representatives and you're going to work out what their process, what their part of this picture is. The comms folks will want a process, and probably one that includes, pre-written, pre-vetted communications, boilerplate, as we used to say. So they're not running around trying to get sign-off on quotes and whatnot in the middle of chaos. Legal and compliance, they need to make sure they have their ducks in a row, your third-party vendors and people in your org who work with those third parties. All of these are just little bitty, they're little sub-processes, and they spin, little gears that spin when the big gear spins, and you are the big gear. So, all those, by the way, are totally worth talking about, but we just have this 1 hour together. But questions coming right up. So, anyway, they are all valued team members, just like their IT counterparts. They should be knowledgeable, and they should be trustworthy, and they should have backup. In other words, if one of the people in these roles is out of the office or unavailable, they need somebody who can step in and take their place. You can't just charge in without your comms person or your lawyer because they're on vacation. Happy for them. You can't do that. So finally, on the team building thought, really put some thought in this. I know it all sounds like soft skill stuff or maybe a little off the what you thought we were going to talk about with response, but I promise you it is not. You're the team leader, and you are going to ask so much of these people. You need them to be ready to drop whatever they're doing, come together, long crazy hours, you're working with fast changing or maybe missing or really abstruse information, and you're asking them to be incredibly good at knowing how to do all that and keep their cool. It's your job to help them succeed, help them be confident, and to keep a sense of perspective in the middle of this mayhem. And frankly, if that's not your skill set, if you're not that kind of people person, you're going to need to train up. And for that matter, I raise this because if you have someone, it's enough for you to learn how to manage a team like this, all these bright, effective people. And you've got a team member in mind, you've got a person in mind for one of these roles that's brilliant and capable, but deep in your heart that person doesn't play well with others, you need to contain that before you bring them on the team, or you need to find somebody else for that role. Get their expertise, you get what's in their head. But if you already know they bring drama, look at this list and tell me if this is the time you want to be managing that kind of stuff. Okay, so wrapping up on this slide, you need an up-to-date contact list. That's totally essential, and I encourage clients to plan also for out-of-band contacts. You know, you might not want to bother people on their home phone, but if your email and your VoIP are potentially compromised, you're going to want to have Plan C ready to roll. And by the way, also, your legal team, those guys again, may have additional thoughts on committing things to writing versus phoning or speaking in person, less discoverable, those last two. So, you know, listen to them on this as you're planning. Let's see, be sure you have dibs on a conference room, like permanent dibs on a conference room that's secure and, you know, access controlled, lockable, whatever you need to do to make sure that you have access to that room and no one else when you need it. A word from sad experience, please don't ask. No whiteboards facing the windows. No windows is a better choice, but please, if you're going to write on the whiteboards, the neighbors should not be watching you do this. I suggest keeping 2 separate email threads per incident. You know, one for the broad, you know, this broad subject matter expert team, and a second one for your tech investigators. So, you know, the good back and forth crunchy stuff, you know, so list A, list B, and it's really, you know, good policy, you know, don't cross the streams, right? You know, hey, Ghostbusters. And it's also good to use a single subject line for each of those 2 threads, just to keep everything in order. You know, honestly, code names may feel a little, you know, a little goofy, a little secret squirrel, but if you name your next incident Chewbacca, and you're good about keeping, you know, Chewbacca talk in your 2 Chewbacca subject line threads, right? Boom, you know, that much more order in your world. Makes it much easier to keep things contained and not be scrambling around for that one thing. I know somebody wrote it. Nah, you cut that off at the knees. All right, one more useful team member there at the bottom of the slide, almost forgot, the scribe. You need someone to take those official notes, you know, and to reach out, do all the logistics stuff, you know, reaching out to bring the team together, whether that's phone or email or whatever you're choosing, and to keep track of who's involved and who's committing to doing what. And, you know, ideally, this isn't you, you're swamped, you know, and in fact, a trusted admin can do this work better than almost anyone. And I recommend if you have that person to spare, you bring them in. Alternately, you can ask, you've got these team members in here, and if somebody's not going to be high utilization for this particular incident, you can ask them to handle it, and maybe even you get a draft of the executive summary out of them. So, you know, we're at 40 minutes after the hour, and obviously I could go on all day about IR planning and teams and response readiness. There is, you know, there's no substitute for having a system in place. You know, the right people, knowing what to do, knowing what's going on, who to ask, understanding the flow of the process and how to react at every stage, right? You know, and I'm a big believer in, you know, failure to plan is planning to fail. That whole thing, that's, you know, it's totally not a joke. But we've been talking about one very specific type of preparation. I want to step to the side for a moment and talk about another aspect of preparation, which is, you know, let's call it situational. For instance, one of the things my IR team does is assess incident response readiness. It's a whole, you know, reportage and review, network and systems, capability, maturity model, get your compliance on, deep dive evaluation. And, you know, we could spend an entire hour just talking about that. Or, you know, you could have us come do one for you. It's very enlightening. But we all know there's more to know out there, right? And situational awareness is important, and it's hard, and it's really easy day to day to fall into, you know, Twitter and the Register and Reddit and Ars Tech and the Hacker News and, you know, all kinds of news and data feeds out there without making that really efficient as far as defending, you know, that which you've got to defend. So some of my BAE Systems colleagues in the UK, you know, they took up that challenge, and so they've got this new service called the Business Defense Assessment, right? It's an 8-week thing, and what they do, which is really exciting from the IR point of view, is they take that point where you're thinking about security analytics, and they look at how that fire hose of information, you know, applies to individual situations, you know, your situation, your sector, your organization. So they start with the fire hose. They take what we here at BAE know about digital risk and threat intelligence and behavioral data that we've noted from working all these thousands of security incidents we've handled, and all the things we understand about early attack stages like recon, and they apply all of that to your one specific environment, and they're looking to see what threat vectors and attack scenarios apply to you. So they take that analysis and they start generating scenarios that a real adversary might follow, kind of either it's like attacker in a cage, or I kind of think of it as a reverse tabletop exercise, which is one of the other things my team builds for clients, we use those to test, well, IR plans and preparedness. And if you haven't done one, by the way, a tabletop, not to sidetrack, but they're really instructive. So we work with you to develop a crisis scenario, and then I waltz in and spend a day with your team running through the scenario with you as if it were really underway. And we learn together how well your team does at working the system and solving this puzzle. It's a really, it's a good process. It can be really surprising and enlightening. And so one of the exciting things about the business defense assessment is like, oh, okay, that's a new wrinkle on trying to solve this preparedness problem, and what is it we are preparing for is sort of the other side of that coin. So anyway, so they take all the scenarios to generate and they work them against threat models, against our own behavior analytics, against this this avalanche of evidence we've gathered from over the years from analyzing scores and scores and scores and scores and scores of attacks, right? So they do all that. And then they start poking at you, right? We look at our network signature database, and we use that to identify known threats in the network and possible targeted attacks. So we go through what we know about your environment, looking for these hidden threats. Is there gaps in your security controls? Well, you'd rather we found them than, other people. At the end, you get a report, findings, remediations, recommendations. And that's you not having to slog through 1,000 information sources. You're trying to parse where you fit into the big picture of the world. We do the work. We paint you the picture, and it's done. So I'm incredibly geeked out on the whole business defensive assessment in terms of watch mode, in terms of IR in general and watch mode specifically, because in those terms, it's like a big honking picture window. It's just a really huge advance in what I think of as incident response readiness. So, neat stuff. All right. So, okay, you know what? It is 45 minutes after the hour. What have we learned? Let's see. Okay. I expect all of you, if you take away nothing else today, please, go back into the world confident in your ability to explain the difference between event, incident, breach. I beg you, please. All right, you have the 6 steps of incident response now. You have assess, identify, respond, report, resolve, review. Great. Then you go back to watch status, of course. You have developed a deep acceptance that this is the circle of incident response life, and that, as with regular life, you need companions. You need your incident response team, both your tech crew and your subject matter experts that are outside of tech. You know there will be mistakes, and you're ready to learn from them. You know that readiness means awareness, and we talked about some processes for that. We touched on the incident response readiness reviews my team does, and we talked about the business defense assessment, which is a cool complementary process to that. So, productive, good talk, folks. Finally, I want to leave you with a sense of perspective, okay? I've quoted politicians, I've quoted TV shows during this talk, but the greatest movie ever made about incident response is Men in Black, right? And there's this one line that I quote quite a bit, and I've written it on every whiteboard of every office I've worked in since I started doing this. And I'm just going to put, because I can't write on your personal whiteboard, I'm going to put the full exchange up on your screen, but I'm just going to read the one perfect line, and but I'm going to apologize to Tommy Lee Jones before I do it. I am not that kind of great. There's always an Arquillian battle cruiser a Carillion death ray, or an intergalactic plague that is about to wipe out all life on this miserable little planet. And the only way these people can get on with their happy lives is that they do not know about it. Dude, always an Arquillian battlecruiser. Hold on. My slide left. It was so overawed by the genius it just departed. But yeah, always an Arquillian battlecruiser. That's your life. You know, unreasonable adversaries, limited resources, incomplete data, short staffing. You know, somebody's always out on vacation or in training. What is that? You know, high stakes conflict. At the end of the day, the best sign you've done the job, you saved the world. You know, the world just keeps right on rolling along and not noticing it. You know, that's that instant response life, folks. Well, you know, may your Arquillians always be manageable. May your incident response team always know when to fire their weapons. You know, may you always learn the easy way. Thanks. Questions?
Hey, Angela, it's Rich. That was really well done. Thank you so much for presenting that. We do have a few questions. Let's see if I can sort through these real quick. So you talked about event, incident, and breach, and I kind of hone in on the incident piece. At what point after an incident is a situation or the situation considered resolved?
Okay. That's a good question, and it's, as I said, that portion is not as linear as one would like, but I tend to do, I tend to say that if you have control of your network back, if you have high confidence level that this, I mean, you may have found heaven only knows what, right, in the course of this, and incidents often spin up other incidents. That's just life. But if you have a high level of confidence that you have, you know, exited, you know, your exit criteria should involve, it's configured to, you know, your network is clean. It is being configured to eliminate a repeat of the drama. You know, the attacker's no longer moving through your network. You won. I mean, it doesn't mean that everything is fixed forever and ever. I think that's right. And like I said, incidents will spawn incidents, and that's, I think, one of the main misconceptions I see out there. It's like, wait a minute, we fixed this, but these things are broken. I'm like, I'm sorry, aren't you glad you know? You know, it's, you know, try and outrun the hackers to that one. How about? So, right. But yeah, there are exit criteria, and as we develop an incident response plan, I actually go through each, you know, very specifically. You know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Here are your exit criteria for stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. There is no exit from watch, by the way. It is simply the air we breathe.
Understood. So that being said, then what's the first thing an organization should do if they find they're under attack?
Ooh, okay. I could be a pain and say, well, what do you mean by under attack, and what do you mean by find? I think the thing to do, one of the things that we work on with folks is making sure that they have an intake process that leads them to a decision rapidly. You know, when you're performing your event intake, when you're gathering, you know, you're pulling together the information to figure out what sort of animal you're dealing with. You should know what normal is. I'm a huge believer in having, part of the great thing about the incident response readiness review is you have an asset list by the end of it, and you have a good one. So you can't fix what you don't even know exists on your network. So you should have that asset list in place, and you should be going, okay, okay, wait a minute, somebody put an entire other router on our network when we weren't looking. How did that get here? You know, you want to look for consistency. If a system isn't consistent to what you believe the assets are, or what its reported activity is versus its actual activity, if you're seeing some discrepancies there, that almost looks like a rootkit to me. If I'm looking at that, I'm like, okay, something's hiding, and it's, you know, if your network activity doesn't match up with all the analyses, something's wrong. So those are the kinds of things you're looking at. You are looking for discrepancies. You are looking for You know, I know what I'm doing. You know, I know where I am, and I am poking this thing with a stick to see what it is. I am
Right.
not a big fan of panicking immediately, but really those first few minutes, everything has to move fast, but you have to be in lock things down, proceed with caution, but proceed mode. Make sense?
Yeah, understandable, right? So what about severity? Is that part of the planning?
Oh, severity. Yeah, I didn't get the severity in this. I should have touched on that. You know, I would wish for everyone that you're not dealing with more than one incident at a time, but you need some structure in your head for, you know, okay, this is bad versus, oh dear, this is really bad. You know, if your comms person, say, comes to you and says, hey, there's a lot of chatter out on Twitter and places like that, and I had a reporter come to me and ask if we're about to be attacked by a DDoS from Anonymous. Okay, well, that's noteworthy. We might want to think about how to act on that. Versus if you walk into work and ransomware has taken over all your computers and nobody can get anything done and they're threatening to nuke your servers. I think we can all kind of feel the severity difference there. But it's good to have some system, especially if communicating to upper management. Yeah, this is concerning. Yeah, this ain't good. Oh dear me, you know, all hands on deck. That can vary a bit. There are a few standards that are used. I personally always give a little extra bump to severity in terms of breaches, simply because of all the legal issues I mentioned. That's definitely something an org should have. You know, it's good to evaluate how others think about it, but really that's the org deciding for itself. A DDoS for one org may be an inconvenience and maybe just a shattering problem for another one. But yes, absolutely thinking of things in terms of severity is a good part of planning.
Yeah, a lot to consider here, right? And I, you know, I'm glad I'm not. I'm glad I'm not in charge of it.
Well, there really is, and that's why I encourage the planning. I mean, I've written so many frameworks and so many plans, and it's a bit of an art, and it's a bit of understanding the org itself, but having it in place, having a procedure when things are on fire, because that adrenaline is something else, and you want to harness that for good instead of having the run in circles, scream and shout mode of incident management. I don't recommend that one. So this is better. I do better this way.
Indeed. So that's a good segue to the next question. I think probably the last question given the time. How do you get buy-in into your incident response plan?
Oh boy. You'll notice all those. Yeah. Assume nothing in that talk didn't come from some kind of experience. You'll notice I kept hitting the executive buy-in, executive buy-in. You are going to be buying a lot of coffee for a lot of people. I have literally, won't say where I was, but I have resorted to bribes. When I needed the attention of basically, the people on that core list. I needed them to be, pay attention to me. And when I needed to go socialize this thing, I bought little personalized coffee cups. I'm like, I'm so excited about our new plan, and I can't wait to talk to you about it. And here is, look, I brought you a cute coffee cup with some, cocoa packets in it. Man, people will do anything for sugar. It is awesome. So definitely, you are doing. This is your charm offensive. You are in a lot of cases with legal, with comms, with less with HR, but they may feel differently about that. With teams that touch regulatory bodies or the public, you want to sit down and come to them humbly as a work in progress and say, I'm building this. This is what we're going to do. I need your buy-in here, and I need your thoughts here. As I said in the talk, comms is going to come back and say, what about some boilerplate? What if we can our response if our network is down, if we're being attacked? It's like, yes, do those things. Legal's going to have lots of ideas, and you should always bring them in. But telling people, making it a point of pride that you have the situation under control before the situation is even there. But you're going to be buying a lot of cups of coffee. You can't just walk in and go, hi, you're on my incident response team, and walk out, because that will disappoint you. So yeah, be charming. Buy some coffee cups, cocoa, sugar, bribes. I'm for it.
Hey, whatever works, right?
That's right. So, that's right.
So it looks like we're just about out of time, and Angela, I'd like to thank you for the presentation, and I'd also thank everyone in the audience for joining us today. Any questions that you heard today, or anything about BAE Systems in general and how we can help, anything around business defense assessment or incident response, feel free to reach out to us at learn, L-E-A-R-N, at baesystems.com. You also should have received Caitlin Kingsley's email address on the confirmation and reminder emails for the webinar, so feel free to follow up with her as well if you have any questions or additional information. Please join us for the next Business Defense webinar on July 20th. More details will be sent out shortly, and have a great rest of your day, and we'll see everyone in July. Thank you again for joining. Take care.